This is going to be fun. So recently I stayed up all night watching Fire in the Sky. Does anyone remember that movie? Did anyone even watch that movie? Anyway, I stayed up all night watching it, and I need some way to justify that, so I didn't just waste an entire night watching Fire in the Sky. So I'm going to intercut the So Bad They're Good moments from Fire in the Sky to lighten up some of the darker sections. Anyway, the Flaming Lips, an American rock band whose discography have gotten more and more creative since their debut album in '86. Their discography is large but diverse and experimental, and they have this reputation of being quirky, cheekily psychedelic, and kinda zany. I wouldn't call all of their music fun, but there is a level of mysticism and adventure going into any Lips record. Each album feels like a new story, even if not all of their albums are narrative albums. Each one has their own distinct stylistic tone to it. Yoshima Battles the Pink Robots feels bubbly, anime-inspired, and both beautiful and bittersweet, with the best example being the hit track, Do You Realize? At War with the Mystics feels as its album cover describes. It's adventurous, a little dark, but epic in scale. Embryonic is too how it looks, its first half being very scary and eerie and noisy, with its second half being sonically dense and nature-themed. I could go on, but the point is that with every Flaming Lips record, you should expect a consistent mood or tone or stylistic decision carried out throughout the entire record. Here we have The Terror, a Flaming Lips record that sticks out like a sore existential thumb in the Flaming Lips discography, where in past albums a dark idea would be matched with a sweet instrumental or followed up with a song that has a more hopeful idea. The Terror does no such reaffirming. It is one of the bleakest albums I have ever heard, and I'm going to cover it in 3 points. 1, The Terror in contrast with the past Flaming Lips records. 2, examining The Terror's lyrics and thematic points. And 3, examining the Flaming Lips in a post-Terror discography.
But that's out of my hands. And so is what you think of me. We've been telling you the truth since the beginning. And now we're ready to prove it. We'll take your damn lie detector test. You set it up. We'll be there. You go ahead. And if any of you got anything to say about me or my crew, you say it now. And you say it to my face.
I've already started a bit on the first point by describing the past Flaming Lips records. The Terror is incredibly unique in how it differentiates itself from everything that has come before it. It's rare to see any band break from their typical sound, but The Terror does so on the Flaming Lips' 13th release. Not only that, but The Terror directly contradicts themes established in previous Flaming Lips records. It's blunt, it's mean, and through its alienating tone, a deep sadness can be felt. The Terror is an anti-love record, it seems, and with this comes themes of being out of control in life and the mundane, existentially horrific concept of living itself. The Flaming Lips have covered upsetting themes prior, but those felt more like an examination rather than a direct belief of Wayne Coyne itself, the band's frontman. For instance, the song Do You Realize from Yoshima Battles the Pink Robots. The song presents a classic Flaming Lips dual-wield mentality of beauty and sadness.
You have the most beautiful face. Do you realize that happiness makes you cry? That everyone you know someday will die.
The repetitive use of Do You Realize gives Wayne Coyne a confident tone. He's informing the listener and not dwelling on the things he's presenting. The idea that all of this is temporary and that the world will move on without us is something that he has already processed and is comfortable sharing. Later it becomes a piece of advice, and that you shouldn't fear being temporary, but should seek to make it all count, made clear by the opening and closing line, "You have the most beautiful face." Wonder what this line implicates exactly. I wonder what Wayne Coyne is suggesting that we fill our time with. This album released a good 10 years before The Terror, just for reference on the time space between the two. And even then, this theme of love is very consistent throughout all of the Flaming Lips records prior. Before moving on, there's another line in Do You Realize that I'd like to read for reference later. You realize the sun doesn't go down, it's just an illusion caused by the world spinning around. We'll get back to that. But now that we're processing lyrics, let's move on to my second point and dive deep into The Terrors, song by song, so we can see how it explores this skepticism of love. But one last point to make, or one last piece of context to give, you may be asking what caused this great shift in the band? Why was The Terror made? And there are two pieces of real-world context to give. Wayne Coyne, the frontman of the band, was divorced by his wife of 24 years. At the making of the album. That, and it's also rumored that a few members of the band were relapsing into drug use at the time as well. Both pieces of context give insight into the record's obsession with control, but I find the greater piece of context to be the first one. Alright, let's dissect. Note, this is all my interpretation, don't get butthurt. The first song is Look. The sun is rising. Notice that it immediately connects to the lyrics of Do You Realize? While you listen to Look, the sun is rising, you will notice these ugly static drones, like machines breathing, and this frantic drumming with these winding, distorted guitars over it. The record sounds hideous, which is paired well with its ugly intention. Throughout the entire record, every instrumental sounds ugly and spacious and isolating. Something completely different to any Flaming Lips records, and it's another part of that sore thumb quality that makes it stick out. So immediately there's a hesitation towards love as a feeling. The Terror uses God as a consistent metaphor, and while it doesn't have any inherently religious themes to it, it does use God as a metaphor for control. I interpret the first stanza as comparing God to love. The spaceship in the clouds symbolizes God's relationship with man, which then in turn is compared with man's relationship with man. In praying with God, it is a one-sided relationship. Only one side truly understands the other. And that peaceful voice at the end is silence, a distant, crushing one. And perhaps the cruelest interpretation of love comes with the next stanza. Wayne calls love a result of MK Ultra, a mind control experiment by the US government in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. The third stanza interprets love as a mechanism of fear, or a product of fear, that without fear, it doesn't hold its own as a genuine emotion. And the last stanza interprets love as a drug, with Wayne telling his spouse that his love for her will last for as long as his brain allows it to. And the sun, amongst all this, represents time, and that it's only a matter of time before it does wear off. The sun is rising, in of itself, is a phrase of fear. It paints a picture of someone staring out towards the rising sun, counting the moments they have left before whatever forms of love around them suddenly and without complete explanation disappears. It's a really brilliant opener for defining many of the metaphors throughout the rest of the record, and it only gets sadder. Be Free Away is the second song on The Terror, and adds to the metaphors already established by the first song. Sonically, where the opener was chaotic and anxious, Be Free Away is droning and reflective. In the first stanza, Wayne questions the creation of love. God is used once more as a metaphor as well as drug use. Wayne asks himself if pain is a product of the pointless expression of love to punish us, to show us that there is nothing to gain from anything. Notice that Wayne is asking questions now in contrast to his confident attitude on Do You Realize? The second stanza calls back to the sun as a metaphor of time. Time moves on, but what really heals? That's the point I think it's trying to get at, that in healing over time, you just become emptier. Its light is not a light that shines is a direct example of this, expressing that time inherently is not a way of healing. The chorus asks even more questions. In the emptiness of love, in the emptiness of healing with time, that sure leaves a lot of empty days in this process. Wayne then makes his first comment about control. Are we really so in control if we're living with so many empty days? Or are we forever abiding by love and the empty healing that comes following it? The next stanza asks even more questions. The term God doesn't actually mean a higher power here. If that was the case, then how could we control it? Rather, Wayne is suggesting that love is similar to a religion. In the same way that religion operates with blind trust, love expects you to do the same. And that will inevitably lead you to try and justify love without taking into account the sheer pain that comes with loving someone. The next stanza recaps the same sun metaphor, and the chorus after that just establishes the same point as the past one as well. The song then repeats the chorus, which echoes out away as the instruments drone on. It's quite chilling.
Your lily white asses and point the finger at me.
That's loaded crud.
No, that's exactly the way it's gonna be! If we decide to take this lie detector test, we all take it. Don't you put your finger at me? All right, Mike, come on! All right! All right!
All right. Go. All right,
Wait,
Dallas.
hey.
Just be there.
That was nice, that felt good.
Try to Explain is the next song on the album, and it doesn't have as many lyrics to it, but it does have a lot of interesting things to say. Sonically, it's pulsing, and it gives me a vibe that I'm slowly falling asleep in a dangerous place. The first stanza is quite simple, but at the same time complex by its interesting word choice. Wayne starts by once again asking more questions, and by this point in the album, it has become clear how unsure the terror is of its own concept, which then, in turn, becomes the main point of what the terror is, which we'll get to in the self-titled track. Wayne begins by asking if it's wise to love someone. To love someone requires a sense of trust, but how can you trust anyone when people always lie? It's humanly impossible not to lie, and so therefore love is built on a fatal, consistent human error. After this line, Wayne finally makes a statement, and what he's stating is really quite sad. The line, "I'm not wise, I believe what you tell me," is a big jab at his former partner. He feels ridiculous in even considering love as a truth at all. That his default mode shouldn't be the take-in lovey remarks without question, and that if that is your default mode, then you're dumb. What I find most interesting lyrically on this song is the repetition of "I believe you" over and over to show all the breach in trust that has occurred. The best lyric out of that, of the whole song, is the brutal single line following all that, "I believe." It signifies to me that at a point in time, Wayne fully believed in love. He welcomed every lovey gesture from his partner and believed it made him happy. Skipping ahead a few stanzas to the last point of the song shows one of the most agonizing pieces of lyrics on the whole record. That after 24 years of marriage, he challenges her to try to even begin to explain where this change occurred, to try and remotely communicate why she's doing this. And no matter what the answer is, it simply won't make any sense. There is no understanding when love falls apart, since it's based on so many of these human errors. You can temporarily, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just futile. And so the song then acts as a challenge. Try to explain. Try. Moving back to some of the stanzas I skipped, Wayne makes another point that love is a chemical that will wear thin over time. Your head ecstatically wanting is a line that compares with the addictive nature of drugs, which love is compared to. And the whole bridge to nowhere once again establishes that love just leaves you empty by the end, which is a point of the terror. I'm just interpreting it. Next up on side B is the track You Lust, the longest track on the record with the littlest variety in lyrics, but it has a lot of points to make nonetheless. I think it's kind of adorable in how Wayne says fuck on the record, but it's censored on the lyric sheet. Speaking of, that serves as a double meaning on the record, both to mess with Wayne and to have sex with him. It's a song about sex. It's not that hard to decipher. It seems that Wayne believes that sex is a loveless voiding act that us as humans are programmed to do, whether or not love is present. He tells his spouse to kill her emperor, which to me is another way of saying get off your high horse. That himself and everyone else desire sex, and that viewing it as something sacred is snobbish. He repeats this anthem of You Lust in the chorus to drive this point home. What's more interesting though is the follow-up to the chorus, in which Wayne whispers lust to succeed over and over again. I believe his intent towards the whispering is two things. That sex isn't inherently a symbol of love, but is something that has become that through culture and taboo by the media. And his whispering is almost like a 1984 thought control kind of thing. The second intent would be that Wayne is playing a role of your inner thoughts, telling you that you have to lust in order to thrive as a person. He's playing that programmed part of your brain that desires these things. The next stanza is really odd in comparison with the sex theme of the song. I'm not entirely sure what the first two verses mean, but the line, when you shoot the stars away, it's the brightest one that's the first to go, also represents two things to me. One, that in picking someone who sexually pleases you is shooting all the other stars away as you're being faithful to that one person. And if you're going to just pick one on the basis that they sexually please you, then it's unlikely that you're picking the brightest star, aka the person that can provide for you in any other way. The second meaning could be that going into a relationship, you separate yourself from those around you. Statistically, you lose 2 close friends every time you get involved in a romantic relationship, and so then the line is implying that there's a certain level of toxicity towards your close relationships with other people when going into a romantic one. The chorus is just a repeat of the previous one, so moving on to the final stanza. It describes the act of seeing someone you're attracted to. Wayne describes this kind of looking as selfish, that your brain is scoping out other people despite the fact that you're in a relationship. Wayne almost uses this as proof that love isn't a genuine emotion, since mentally your brain is always lusting. Someone will always catch your eye. Even in a relationship, you find other people attractive. It can never be destroyed. You just choose not to act on it. Moving on to the self-titled track, The Terror. You starting to feel it now?
I want 2-man teams on that ridge. That boy's out here. I want to find him. You got it? Let's get going, boys. God bless you.
We're 5 songs in, and I have yet to really cover what exactly The Terror is, specifically. The terror is a constant state of being that we are all confined to. In its simplest form, it's the lack of control over bad things that happen to you. That whatever hurt or pain or sadness that you're feeling, there's no magical love to swoop in and save you from the constraints of reality. Love will only go so far. It will deplete. And the terror is realizing that all you have is yourself. And what you have for yourself is very, very little control. That is the general idea of the self-titled track. The second stanza goes into a bit more of the creation of the album. Wayne explains here that art to him is a coping mechanism, that the reason this terribly pessimistic album exists is to try to relieve or communicate some of the pain that Wayne is feeling. And to those listening, it's to relieve theirs as well. The third stanza is taking a naive and optimistic outlook. I think what it's getting at with the last verse, the sunshine every day, is to intentionally create this loophole. That, yeah, love will save us every day in the same way that the sun shines every day. But what about night? What about the literal other half of the day? Do you realize has already established a kind of abstract outlook on the concepts of day and night? So the point overall is that the sunshine can only go as far as its limitations, and the same to love. The last stanza feels personal to Wayne's scenario prior to the album, that his spouse would deny that she's losing interest in Wayne, but at the same time would do very little to prove opposite. That's just my interpretation of it. I'm not entirely sure what he's getting at with those. Moving on to side C, we have the very fitting song title, You Are Alone, which narratively makes sense to come at this point in the album, since we have just learned that the terror is coming to terms with loneliness. You Are Alone is a really interesting mishmash. It seems to be an argument between him and his spouse, as well as a realization. The first stanza seems to be an argument. I'm assuming it's taking place at the events of the divorce, in that every bad thing Wayne has done during that period of marriage is now just coming out, rather than being put to light prior. That Wayne has been living in a bubble this whole time, not of his choice, but that his spouse is just now popping. And Wayne's response is simply denial. Why haven't these things been brought to light before? Why are they talking about it just now? And it begs a question that is love just overlooking your significant other's bad qualities? The second stanza is the realization that towards the end of him and his spouse's relationship, the only significant feeling of love he'd feel between them would be during sex. This connects to the last part of the previous song, where Wayne wonders if his partner is losing interest in him, but she's constantly denying it. And once again, in realizing this, he denies. My favorite verse on the song comes next, where he refuses to be the odd one out and calls her alone, and in turn, she then calls him alone. But with two people who are arguing which one is the one that's alone, it seems kind of redundant. In any scenario, if one of them feels alone, then it is both of them that do. And it then delves into this tedious, silly debate when they're both right. Moving on to the next track, Butterfly, How Long Does It Take to Die? Butterfly, How Long Does It Take to Die expresses the long, miserable nature of dying. In the same drawn-out process as watching the sun rise and set is people living and dying. Life is long and static, and with the theme of loneliness, the journey is typically alone. The butterfly is a symbol of the beautiful things that you'll encounter on this long, aching trek, that eventually every beautiful thing around you will at some point turn against you, making this long, crushing journey to death even longer. In the viewpoint of the terror, death isn't a relief. There is no mantra of live life to the fullest then to escape these kinds of sadnesses. Instead, life and death are put in the same vein. The last stanza projects this sight of life and death that we witness cosmically every night. A day is born and suddenly, without any of our control, is taken away from us. Like love, like the people you know, like the beautiful butterfly, it will leave you, and you shouldn't feel emptier afterwards. The sun does the same thing to you every day and night. You should have felt empty all along. Turning violent is repetitive and simple. It's the same phrase repeated over and over and over again. To understand Turning Violent, we have to make another connection to a past Flaming Lips record. Transmissions from the Satellite Heart, a beautiful record about the connections you make throughout life with friendship and love. That's the point of a heart as a symbol of love, that it's a satellite towards other people's. And through understanding and turning on your satellite heart, you can come to understand everyone. The opening track of Transmissions from the Satellite Heart is titled Turn It On, in which the band expresses the importance of keeping an open heart, turning on your satellite heart.
Houses when you wake up, turn it on. Ain't got no relation to all those other stations, turn it on.
I'm smiling just thinking about this record. It's a nice momentary break from the existential terror that is the terror. And the final song on Transmissions from the Satellite Heart wraps up the theme with this narrative about this free-spirited young girl who got caught up in the normality of life in the working class and settling, and thus closes her satellite heart. But for the people around her, they remember her fondly and rejoice to the fact that she was a beacon and had helped them open their satellite hearts and become open to the world. The phrase turn off, turn on is a constant theme throughout the record, and so to bunch it together with Transmissions from the Satellite Heart's theme of togetherness and love makes sense. It is something that I had to bring up, as the terror is the total opposite thematically. So, to put it simply, Turning Violent is just about turning off your satellite heart, becoming angrier at the world because you can no longer sympathize with the people around you. Wayne's satellite heart has no room to transmit anymore. He has no belief in love, no belief in community. The satellite has been reduced to the first part of its name, a cold, distant object floating in a black void of space. Oh, we did it. We got to the final track. Always there in our hearts.
Well, how could you just leave him out there?
Yep. The radio was saying something about outer space.
I didn't just leave him. And yeah, there was something out there, Kate.
I don't understand. Out there? Is Travis gone?
They're gonna send out a search party for him tomorrow.
Where is he, Mike? Where is he, Mike? Where is he, Mike? Mike?
It's okay. It's gonna be okay.
The final track on The Terror is a blowout. It's explosive, it's anxious, it has these pummeling drums, and it really nails the main point of the record. Sonically, it's as overwhelming as its lyrics. It's one final stand of energy against the metaphoric weight that is the terror. Lyrically, I really only have two things to say about it. What Wayne is stating, is always in our hearts, is really easy to understand. It's just a summary, essentially, of all of the tracks prior. Notice the consistent use of the heart as a metaphor on this track, which is the one that follows up the track that connects to transmissions from the satellite heart. The most notable part here, and possibly the most profound, hard-hitting part of the entire record, is the very last line. A joy of life that overwhelms. That is probably the best description of love I think I've ever heard. It's a fantastic summation, and Wayne couldn't have put it any better. And once the music fades, you're left feeling about as empty as the terror says you always were. My personal values don't align with the terror completely, thankfully, but there's been points in my life where I've found things that it has said to be true. And I think everyone can say the same thing. The Terror is its name. The album is a glimpse into hard, crushing feelings that are terrifying to come to terms with. So to my third point about the album, the terror will never go away. It is forever ingrained in the Flaming Lips discography. This album is like seeing your funny, carefree friend who never takes anything seriously suddenly break down and ugly cry in front of you. And a lot of time later, when you're with that friend and he's fine and dandy, you still have that image in your head. That doesn't go away. That moment will never leave your viewpoint of them, despite how much they change or how fun or silly they are afterward. No matter how silly Oxy Melody is, or how well Wayne comes to terms with death in King's Mouth, or how lovely American Head will be, the terror is always there, and will always be there to remind you of its bleak, isolating existence. That's the most powerful part of the terror to me, and that's the part that rings so eerily true.
I heard a million voices of endless complexity. There was no barrier.